So this is the point group, and the question is, what's the point?
Wow.
I'm going to read the blessing of today's Murli, which is June 8th, right? Today is June 8th. May you be a Raj Rishi and a master of yourself and be victorious over your subtle powers. It is easy to become a conqueror of your sense organs, but it requires subtle practice to become victorious over your mind, intellect, and sanskaras, your subtle powers. Easily to adopt the sanskar or thought that you need at a particular time is said to be victorious over your subtle powers. It is the stage of a Raj Rishi. If you order your powers of thought to concentrate right away, then for the king's orders to be obeyed instantly in that way is a sign of being a master of yourself. By practicing this, you will pass the final paper. Okay, so now these murlis also come in Hindi. We are saying that, okay, now we are in destruction. And destruction is not a 5-minute thing. It's long. And everybody has a turn to be under the gun. So at the moment you are experiencing being under the gun because for some time there has been circumstances of war which is impacting you directly. And because of that, there are many things that happen in the mind. So when you are impacted directly, you're impacted directly because it impacts people you know. It impacts a place where you're living, and it is on the media a lot. And there's a lot of different stories flying around. So one of the things that you experience is something that can be called depression. Because when you're in a strong and violent situation, there's actually nothing you can do. And there's also lots of reactions that a lot of people are having around you. And there are a lot of reactions on the media and all of this. So this is called a test. And in the blessing it says, when you're under attack, you have to tell your mind to stop and go to Baba. I don't know if you remember what Baba had described about the last exam. Do you remember that? I'll just remind you for anyone who doesn't. But he said, at the last exam, you will be attacked by the 5 vices all at once, the 5 elements of matter all at once, and ghosts. Ghosts. And so that means there's quite a lot of attack coming in a variety of ways all at once. And the exam is you recognize this is the moment when I leave my body with all of these things going on. And in order to do that, you have to be in a state called acceptance. Right? Acceptance. Yeah. So, because in this scene, there are a number of people who are faced with their death and they accept. And you have a much larger number of people who do not accept. So, in this last exam, not only do we have to keep the mind still to accept our own death, but the death of other people and the chaos and the hopeless, helpless state, and to let it be. That's more difficult. So then bring it to the self at the present moment. Can I say, okay, I know what happened. I know some of what happened. I know some of what is happening at the moment, because there are responses to all this going on also. There are many people who are responding to it in their own individual ways. And here we are in a different country, aware about what happened, what is happening, the uncertainty. So when somebody is facing with their death, there's nothing uncertain about it. It's definite. When you are in the present state, there's quite a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what is next. And so that is a very important thing to bear in mind when considering what is happening in my mind in the face of uncertainty. Right? Because there's lots of uncertainty. You don't know. Theoretically, everything is uncertain. But the uncertainty of what will happen in 5 minutes from now here is not something that creates anxiety, because most likely nothing in particular will happen. And so there isn't any feeling about it. If you would be listening to a siren, it would be different, because you don't know whether it means something's going to happen to you, so you're going to be in the acceptance of, I'm about to blow up, or somebody else is about to blow up. So there you have the anxiety connected with the uncertainty. So when you're in a circumstance like this, there is this anxiety. Anxiety is something that you perceive in your mind, and the anxiety is provoked by sense perception, what you hear, what you see, what you remember, what you associate it with, and so on, all of which brings the state of anxiety. And then what Baba is saying is you will be in different circumstances which bring different forms of anxiety, and in that you have choice. You have choice. Will I carry on being in a state of anxiety, which is what people usually do? Will I remember God and say, oh God, whatever it is, it's fine by me, and it's okay, you see? And we also are in the circumstances of public opinion. Public opinion plays a big role in this, because if you would decide, okay, here's a very dangerous situation and I'm going to be calm in it and say, oh God, whatever it is, it's fine. If I die, if they die, if anybody dies or nobody dies, whatever it is, it's fine. Now, public opinion wouldn't like that, because they say in public opinion, it is right to have a strong reaction. And if you don't have a strong reaction, there's something wrong with you, right? That's public opinion. And that's a very big influence. And if you have just gyan, and you say, okay, I might die, I might not die. Here is a signal saying you might die in the next minute, or you might not die, or somebody might die or not, or the building might fall down or not, or blow up or not, or there may be pain or not, or there may be a lot of panic around or not. It could be anything. And when this is going on, then your mind starts moving quite fast, because you're going from this could be, that could be, the other could be, etc. Plus you have public opinion, which says you better be going crazy. And then you have Baba saying, this is sense perception, and what's coming into your mind is sense perception, and you are a non-material being of light. And here is a significant moment where there's a test going on, and you pass this test by being stable and steady in the face of all of these many different kinds of positive, negative, maybe, maybe not, all kinds of uncertainties. And you decide in the middle of that, okay, Baba, whatever it is, I'm with you. This is what he's telling us to do, right? And the biggest, I think the biggest problem is the impact of public opinion. Because you have absorbed the public opinion idea of what is proper in such circumstances. And now that there has been several months since your initial shock moment, a public opinion has been saying a lot of things. And so the multiple stories, you can say, stories in the public mouth, stories that people are saying, pulls you into a kind of vortex of stories. And the intention of the public opinion is that you should be in this vortex of stories, and you should be reacting, and you should be objecting, you should be in this mentality of justice, injustice, approval, disapproval, revenge, reaction. All of these are all part of what I generally call conventional morality. And there are two epics. One is the Mahabharata and one is the Ramayana. So the Ramayana is all about public opinion, the power of public opinion. And the Mahabharata is all about you're trying to decide what's right and what's wrong. Yourself, you decide. And of course, when Baba talks to us, he says, if you pass the exam, that's Golden Age stage, that's Pandav, that's the Mahabharata, basically, the Gita. And if you fail, that's the Ramayana. And the reason why somebody would fail is because of the power of public opinion, more than the power of your own personal choice or your own personal ability to handle the situation. Whether it's the narrative or whether it's other people's vibrations, in both cases, I think, the thing that Baba has told us is this word in Hindi, Sakshi Drishta. Have you heard this before? Sakshi Drishta. It means you are the completely uninvolved witness. And that is a very, very high stage, because some people, when they experience a very severe attack like this and a lot of anxiety in the atmosphere and in the narrative and so on, it's too much. And it's very common, which is also mentioned in psychotherapeutic circumstances, that people have fight or flight or fawn.
Fawn, like freeze?
Fawn.
Freeze, freeze.
Fawn is like being nicey so that the people will not do anything nasty, but they will anyway.
Oh.
Fight, you want to fight something that's bigger than you will not win. Flight, you want to run away, they're running faster. So in cases like this, people do the fight, flight, fawn as an instant reaction, which cannot be successful, and they become paralyzed. Or some people, they become paralyzed right away. So this state of paralysis, because it's too much. So you will find in the narrative some people fighting, arguing, this is no good, blah, 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 all that kind of thing. Flight, avoiding, it's not that bad, this is not real, we don't have to deal with it because somebody made it up, that's flight.
Blaming others maybe can also come into that?
Blaming others, I think I would probably put it under fight. And then fawn is, well, all you have to do is just be nice, and then whoever is doing whatever bad thing it is, it'll go away by itself, So all you have to do is just be nice. And but when it's really strong, this paralysis is what mostly comes in. And when you're right in front of facing your death, and it's like in front of you, and you press the button on your cell phone and you say goodbye to your family, you have decided, you see what it is, you accept your fate, you've done it. So that's a very special type of response, very powerful response. I think a lot of people would not be having that response because they may be paralyzed or they may be shocked or something like this and just unable to do anything. I think that the people who picked up the phone and so on, they had a little bit of lead time. They could hear something is happening, it's coming, there's no way out, what will I do? Who do you remember first? Your loved ones. And so you have your cell phone, you can give a last goodbye. And so Baba says, you must have remembrance in such a way so that when something comes up, your first thing that you think about is Baba. And he says that normally that wouldn't happen because your attachment is mostly with your loved ones. And he's teaching us in Raj Yoga to transfer our attachment from our loved ones to incorporeal God. And that's a big deal. And therefore it takes lots of time, lots of circumstances, lots of investigation, study, so many things. It takes a lot to actually transfer your attachment from yourself to your body, your bodily relations, and then he talks about your bodily religion. And bodily religion doesn't just mean the religion that you belong to, but it also refers to culture and just the whole set of messages, you can say narrative, that has been coming into your mind from your parents, teachers, religious environment, social environment. All these messages are conditioning. And so our responses are very much influenced by our conditioning. So in order for us to undo that, we have to do a lot of practicing and imagining and positioning ourselves in one way or another way to be able to do it. From time to time, you experience a near-death experience, right? And you could even say that someone who is in a situation like you just mentioned, and they expected to die, but in the end they didn't, it would still be called a near-death experience because they were so close they could easily have, but they survived. And when you have a near-death experience, it's very important because you don't have time to decide how you're going to react. It's right away. And it's very important because afterwards you go back and you look at how did I respond in the face of I could have died. So that happens when people have near death on the operating table sometimes, where they almost go, but then they get brought back by the medical professionals. Or you could be in a car accident or some other similar accident, which is definitely fatal, but somehow you survive it. And or a war situation. And then you see, okay, what happened in me in front of that? You see. Were you afraid? If you were afraid, were you afraid of pain? Were you afraid of losing your existence? Were you afraid of losing your people? Were you afraid of, like any other thing that you might possibly be afraid of? Or were you...
Confronting violence.
Confronting violence, yes. So what happened exactly? So I think people who have near-death experiences in any of those or other type of situations, they come to find out about themselves something very important. Because they find out, because they're right in front of it, I think, whether or not you're afraid of death and death by violence. This question of the difference in time. Because it's very important about controlling your mind and applying these methods that Baba has given. And also your perspective on what's going on. So when you are in an emergency situation like that, you do separate from your body. Time slows down enormously because it's necessary for you to go onto a kind of automatic pilot where you protect your body to the maximum extent. And people who are, say, they have a an accident and they're drunk, they can't do it. If you're not drunk, you can do it. Because when you're drunk, you're in an altered state of consciousness. You're completely diminished in your ability to function in the subtle form like that. So this is very important to just kind of be aware that this phenomenon is there. And that in that time, because it's very slow, you have a lot of time to make choices. And you can also make choices about how you position your body in circumstances where there are possibilities to protect your head especially. And then also to decide you'll go or you'll stay. And when you're deciding whether you'll go or you'll stay, there's also an aspect about destiny. If you have to stay, you will stay, so then you better do something about it. And if you have to go, you will go, and then you have to position yourself for going. With near-death experiences, we don't get too much information about people who go because they go. But we get a lot of information about people who have to stay and what they do when they have to stay. But all of this, the importance of all of this is to apply in your thinking this concept of drama and this concept of being a soul, this concept of perception. You see, because as an embodied soul, you are conscious of being alive in a body with an identity, with a role, with circumstances, people, all of this. And what he wants us to really understand through a number of different experiences and so on, soul consciousness means ultimately there's no difference whether you're alive or dead. There's no difference. Because whether you're in a body or you're not in a body, you're still there. The narrative, public opinion, all comes from the idea is that you're either alive or you're dead. So body consciousness in a way is that you're either alive or you're dead. And soul consciousness is whether you're in a body or you're not in a body, it doesn't make any difference. If somebody else is in a body or not in a body, it also doesn't make any difference. So what makes a difference is this thing called detachment. All of this Raj Yoga knowledge is given to us in the circumstances of the end of the cycle. Something that has been discussed in the media by people who are considering it is whether or not we are going to have nuclear war. And if you have nuclear war, that means we will all die. That's the word that comes. And the idea of we will all die is so unacceptable that they do something about preventing that. But recently there has been a lot of threats of nuclear war. And so people have been talking about different times when the governments who have who own nuclear weapons and who can decide to press their button or not press their button, in all the cases, when it comes right up to the moment, the human being has some mechanism inside which says, I cannot do an act which makes that happen. You see? And what Baba has said about it, interestingly, is that if you press a button for a nuclear war, the quantity of people that you're directly responsible for killing is too big for the soul to handle. And so there cannot be such a situation. It's not. So therefore, when it does happen, which it will happen in such a way that nobody can be called responsible. And so who knows what that will be? Some sort of accident, or a robot will do it, or who knows what. But anyway.
It might be the AI deciding that it's. It might be AI deciding that.
Well, people are concerned about how much control AI has, but I don't know enough about to what extent artificial intelligence can take over from human decision making. A lot of people are afraid about it, but generally people who know about it say that you can't. You're always under the instruction of a human person. So I cannot really say. Maybe in the future it can be like that. But okay, what's important about this is to develop the really clear awareness that it doesn't make any difference whether I'm alive or dead, because I'm eternal. I'm always alive, whether in a body or not in a body. When I'm in a body, the soul is activated. When you are summarily ejected from a body, then you're immediately in the subtle body, which means you're conscious. And when you go to the world of nirvana, which is the next thing that happens at the end of the last death, is you are merged. There is no awareness at all. So many BKs, they have this idea that I will have a nice time in nirvana. I will be in bliss. Actually, you will not be aware that you exist. And some BKs cannot accept this idea. And sometimes it is said, okay, practice being in the seed stage, okay, because in the soul world you're in the seed stage. And everybody has heard the soul is pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful being of light. And so there is the assumption that you will always experience this, but in reality you will not. So that's quite difficult for a practitioner of Raj Yoga to practice being in or to consider that when they cannot experience that they exist, they still exist. So what that means is one of the things we need to do is to think about the reality that it is okay for me to be unaware that I exist, and know that even if I'm unaware that I exist, I still exist, because that's the definition of a soul. That's the meaning of being an immortal soul. So these ways of practicing, these ways of thinking, when you think about it deeply in meditation, you practice it, you consider it. Baba often uses the word consider. Consider yourself a soul. Consider you are beyond all these things. When you practice it in a very focused way, you will generally get insights. And it is these insights that make it clear to you that it's okay. Just imagining it or intellectualizing it is not enough. It doesn't give you that complete knowing that, yeah, it is okay. So part of what happens to us is different kinds of experiences which suddenly catapult us into a situation where we discover certain things about ourselves, like I'm afraid of death, I'm not afraid of death, I'm not afraid of violence, I am afraid of violence, something like this. Also, if we say we have had 84 births, we would have also had 84 deaths, which means we would have died of something. Now, what we have to practice in Raj Yoga is leaving the body voluntarily. And leaving the body voluntarily has to be the last sanskar. So when we get faced with a death moment, and the good thing is we get several opportunities for this. Every time you have an opportunity, you can refine how you voluntarily leave the body, right? Because you may start off having a near-death experience and know that you are afraid. So then that's a reality that you have to deal with. Okay, I am afraid of death. So now what am I going to do about it? So you have to think about it. Why am I afraid of death? What kind of death am I afraid of, etc., etc.? And bring yourself forward to a point where you come to terms with death. And acceptance and coming to terms is very important.
When you said, are we afraid of violent death, I had this thought reaction that what does it say about me if my last death is violent one? Like some kind of a doubt. I mean,
Well, exactly. And I would raise the matter of faulty logic. You've heard me talk about faulty logic quite a bit.
so I was an expert in it.
It's like if then. If this happened to me, it means such and such. It doesn't. Why do people use faulty logic is partly because of this public opinion narrative. And I don't think a lot of people really sit down with this concept of faulty logic to really sit with themselves and say, okay, self, am I engaging in faulty logic? Because if you sit down with yourself and ask yourself this question, you're able to arrive at a wiser conclusion than a kind of knee-jerk reaction of, if I'm afraid of violent death, what does this say about me? Or it means I'm this, or something like that. It doesn't. The narrative says that, but it's not real. So that's why it's useful to take up the subject and discuss it. So when you experience that you are afraid of death or afraid of violent death or whatever it is, it means that you are having information. It's like a data input. In this circumstance, I feel such and such. And it doesn't mean anything other than, in this circumstance, I feel such and such. That's all it means, you see. But if you jump to a conclusion that it means something else, I would call that faulty logic. And I find a lot of people operate in faulty logic, like they're dedicated to faulty logic. And I believe a lot of it has to do with conditioning. As you're raised, as you're educated, as your kind of religious and cultural messages, these are the ones that produce this faulty logic, because all of these messages are based on the idea that if I'm in the body, I'm alive, otherwise I'm not. This idea of life and death. I exist or I don't exist. So this very key thing of I'm an eternal, immortal soul is easy to say, it's easy to have a concept about it, but to actually bring it to something that is so clear, so visceral, that you are completely independent of any of these messages that say otherwise. And when you have a number of near-death experiences, it gives you the opportunity to cultivate that independence and just deal with this data. And you can evaluate yourself, and you can tell in a way how far ahead you have moved from the consciousness of I exist if I'm alive in a body, and not if not. Now, people who come to Gyan, who recognize Baba, who recognize themselves, that's not all BKs, that's certain BKs. Baba has said, you come to Gyan as a result of having done complete bhakti. Or they say you cannot come into Gyan until you have completed your bhakti. And that means that you have had many, many births considering the question of your existence, and many deaths under the aspect of having considered your existence, which means you have the sanskar already. When you come into Gyan, you already have the sanskar to a certain extent, some to a large extent, some to a slight extent, that you know when you come into this birth that you're eternal and immortal. But you don't have all the details, but you do have the sanskar. He also tells us that when you go to the Golden Age, you will not know any of this knowledge, but you will have the sanskar to be able to leave your body voluntarily when you get a little message or a little vision or something. Okay, now I'm going to become a baby or whatever, right? So you have that already. But you don't know to what extent. So when you have a near-death experience or a big shock or something like that, and you observe how you handled it, what you felt, and so on, this will give you a quite good piece of information to let you know how near or far you are from being really soul conscious, in terms of, I know that when I leave this body, I'm just as alive as when I'm in this body, you see, which is something we need to get to. Baba has said that there will be nuclear war, which will finish off, billions of people in a matter of moments. Nobody will tell you in advance, okay, you've got 2 minutes to live. What we heard recently in the media is because there are hypersonic weapons, it takes only, 2 minutes, whereas if you would use a normal speed of rocket, it would take 15 minutes. Because hypersonic is 10 times the speed of sound. And normally they go Mach 1 or Mach 2, but not Mach 10, right, hypersonic. So if you want to go in a normal airplane from here to New York, you know that it's going to take you pretty much 6 hours, because it's X number of miles, say, I don't know how much it is, say 5,000 miles. Now if you're going at Mach 10, to go 5,000 miles, you can calculate how many minutes it is. And when people are operating with equipment that goes at that speed, And there's no information given to anybody, it's just sudden. Everything suddenly, all at once. So all at once, everybody suddenly is like, oh, we're all dead now. Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm dead too.
In the attack of Iran onto Israel, the latest one, the 300 or so
Yes.
missiles, there was some of that experience.
And so it means that the governments are aware of what kind of toys are being used. We, as BKs, we take into consideration various new pieces of information about technology because we're interested, we have a vested interest in it. Because when we are preparing ourselves, we have to think about it quite tangibly, quite realistically. One thing that we do know, which I don't know if you know, but you will always know about 1 second before that, okay, I'm going to die now. Not because of any tangible information, but you'll get a little message. And I experienced this also in relation with natural calamities. So things that happen very quickly are earthquakes or these flash floods or volcanoes. What we know in nature is that right before an earthquake, the birds stop singing. In parts of the world where there are elephants that are held in chains, you must have seen this, that elephant is perfectly capable of breaking that chain. And he does when there's something like that and he has to move, and he will break whatever you think is restraining him. It's not restraining him at all. And then they will respond, because there is a vibration between something happening and that thing actually taking place. And it can be just a second. But as you know, when time goes slowly, that 1 second is quite long. Sometimes even Baba has said concerning this Dharmaraj that you will have a punishment for something you did that will take 1 second, but it will feel like 1,000 years. So time is very subjective in that sense. And if we are in our consciousness very, very subtle, and we will pick up these things. So I think part of soul consciousness is you're really clear that there's no difference whether you're alive or dead. You get it, you know. It's not that you comprehend it, you get it. And that you are able to be aware of this little signal which will tell you 1 second before, okay, get ready because it's now. And you can position yourself in Baba's remembrance. You don't have to be, as it were, in Baba's remembrance. You just happen to be in Baba's remembrance and it comes. No, you have this little signal. And so the practice is, can you establish yourself in Baba's remembrance as quickly as 1 second? Because you will have that much time to establish yourself. So although he says you must practice to be in remembrance 8 hours a day, there's still another 16 hours where you're not, right?
8 hours
Yes.
a day.
And what is 8 hours remembrance, you know? It's like you're really close to that vibration of subtlety where you know that you're connected. And when you're not connected, a lot of time it's because you're busy with something. And or something's going on, or you're reacting to something, and then when that's finished, then you say, oh yeah, I was out of touch. And then as soon as you notice you were out of touch, then you bring yourself back into touch. And one of the things that keeps one very much out of touch is when you are paying attention to the narrative. You're listening to the news, you're watching the interviews, and you're watching the videos and all of those things, and they are sense overload. They're very much sense overload because they're about serious situations. They engage your attention fully. You need to know about it because you have to be informed. And I think one thing that you can do when you have a lot of exposure to that is you get to a point where it's no longer able to hold your full attention. It's going on, you're kind of used to it, you're fully informed and so on and so forth, but when it is starting up, in any war, the coverage of a war is always, wow, what's going on, this is happening, I need to know what's going on, and they give you lots of stuff with lots of orchestras behind it and God knows what else, sound effects and so on. And that's because news is business and you want as many people as possible watching because that's how your business works. So they are motivated to make it completely sensory overload. And people like sense overload. It's very difficult for a person to sit somewhere without too much going on. And we saw this particularly in COVID. And one of the things I noticed, especially about COVID, is that BKs, in general, because they're so used to meditating and all this, when you're stuck somewhere and you can't go out and there's nothing going on, it's like, it's all right. But other people, it's not all right at all. You cannot sit there. So what was happening in the COVID lockdown is a huge amount of domestic violence and a huge amount of alcohol consumption because people couldn't stand being stuck in the house. Whereas for BKs, it was just so normal to, go into Baba's remembrance or do some activity that, engages you in such a way that you're all right, you can't go out, okay, it doesn't matter. So for us, it didn't really make that much difference whether we were stuck in the house or free to go out. But for other people, a very big problem. In the same way, when you have a big event with lots and lots of media coverage and social media and official media and unofficial media, and everybody's wanting to know or wanting to be the person who knows more than the other people, like this, you have a certain amount of time of this sensory overload, and you gradually capture in your intellect the whole picture. You get what's going on. These people are doing this to these people are doing that back to the other ones, there's a dance going on at a certain speed, and it's the war drama or whatever. And people talk about it, it becomes a little bit repetitive. As soon as it's repetitive, you can detach, because you know in advance the repetition cycle. And that's a very interesting thing to use, because once you know the story independently of it happening, then you naturally go into the detached observer quite easily. You naturally process what are the possibilities for yourself in the context of that narrative. And then it becomes quite possible for you to be in connection with being a soul, being soul conscious, being connected with Baba while that's going on. It doesn't take up all of your attention, you see. And I think this is one of the important reasons why Baba teaches us, you know, this word sahaj, which everybody calls easy Raj Yoga, but which you've heard me from many times say in the context of people. It's also in the context of circumstances. So however extreme the circumstances become, there's this sort of narrative that happens around it, which becomes repetitive, and then you get it. Okay, I am a soul in the context of this particular vortex of sense overload, but it's okay because I get it. You know, this is drama going on. You see what I mean? And then, because we do this over so much time, and I do also think that everybody gets their turn of extremes, right? So at the moment we have a war going on in a number of places, and whoever is involved in it or watching the media about it, they're very aware about it. And then one of the things it says in the Gita, which Daddy Genki used to talk to us about quite a lot, so it's like an important sentence, that the nature of circumstances, all circumstances, good or bad or indifferent, they arise, you become aware of them, they persist for some time, doesn't matter how much, could be short, could be long, you don't know, and then they fall away. And all circumstances follow this kind of wave pattern. And it's very important to know this because it protects you from being catapulted into a panic or into a depression or into an inability to endure something for too long, more long than you can handle, because you know intellectually this thing is arising, it will persist 1 day, 2 days, 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 years, whatever, but there's a limit to it and it will go down again. And you can put yourself on the other side of that because you're an eternal soul anyway. And this way it extends your tolerance, right? So these are like yuktis that you can use when you find yourself in a situation where your powers are really stretched, and that enables you to sort of amplify your power, amplify your stretch, and not have to go into fight or flight or freeze or fawn or whatever the psychological limitations are of a regular person who's not doing this practice in the context of difficulties. So the sannyasis, you know, they go into the jungle, and that means there's no family to deal with, there's no business to deal with, there's nothing to deal with except perhaps a couple of tigers. So they practice being in tune with nature to be able to be there, and but yet Baba calls that limited sannyas. And ours he calls unlimited sannyas, in the sense that we can work with difficulties of different extremes to a point where we kind of get the way things work, and then we become independent of them. This is translated as easy Raj Yoga. This is not easy. And the circumstances that you find yourself in, that you have to work with, tend to be way outside your capability. You know, when you start Raj Yoga, it's within your capability, and it gets tweaked, so it's more and more outside your capability. And when something's really outside your capability, you need quite a long time in that difficulty to acquire the capability. But so be it, you know. And then you get the capability, so you've then moved to another level, right? And then, of course, the next test will be worse. And a funny thing is, you know, people who, and this is BKs, especially BKs who left Gyan, one of the reasons why they leave Gyan is they say, and again it's my idea of faulty logic, if these people have been doing Raj Yoga for this much time and they're encountering all these difficulties, it means this is not God. You see, people use this logic because they have assumptions, also based on some of the things that Baba says, you know, you've been doing this for 10 years, therefore you should be really good at it, right? And when people have been doing it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever it is always getting more difficult. And outside observers can't fathom that because they're not evaluating it, taking into consideration the whole thing. You have to take into consideration that there's a test going on, there's an exam going on. You're not going from PhD to kindergarten, it's the other way, you know. And kindergarten's easy, PhD is not. Postdoctoral is even more difficult. It requires more capacity. So you're building capacity all the time, plus you're settling karmic accounts. You're dealing with physical deterioration of the mind, body, circumstances, financial this, that. All of these things are getting more and more difficult. And you are in the circumstances for as long as it takes to build the capacity in that situation. And once you've done that, then something more difficult will come along.
Then just give me this image of someone who's lifting, how do you call it?
Yeah, the weights.
The weights, and so, okay, you reach a certain point and then you add more, and then you need to build the muscle for that, and then you add more.
Exactly. It's a very, very good analogy. And you would think that it'd be logical and that people would consider it like that. But because the word Sahaj Raj Yoga is translated as easy, it sort of confuses people.
And also using the law of karma wrongly, as if something bad happened, so I must be doing something wrong.
Yes.
You know, just
And that's because you have got karma, drama, destiny, and, you know, maybe other things all happening at the same time. And you have to be able to deal with, okay, which one is appropriate for me to identify in this moment in order to get past the situation. Because people normally say, I need to know, is this drama or karma? And then we have to say to them, that's not how it works. And then they say, it has to be how it works. Okay, bye, see you later. You don't get it. You don't get it. It's not my problem, it's your problem. You know, you can't make a person understand. There's another very lovely verse in the Gita, and it says that in regard to these things, some people perceive how extraordinary it is. Other people have heard about how it's extraordinary, and so they say it's extraordinary. And other people have heard that somebody else has heard about that it's extraordinary, but they can't perceive it. But none of those people really get it, I see. And that's a very important piece of information. And of course, Baba says he is giving the correct or original knowledge of the Gita. And that there is the amount of truth in the Gita as the amount of salt in a sackful of flour. Pinch of salt in a sackful of flour. That's a wrong translation, because the ratio of a pinch of salt in a sackful of, 25 kilos of flour? That's a very small ratio. But ate melun is not a sackful of flour. Ate is a chapati. How much salt in one chapati? 1%. So the Gita is 700 verses. So 1% of that is 7 verses. That's quite a lot of information. But I think it's more about perception.
But wouldn't mischief be like based on perception? That when I have perceived it, then I have the conviction, I have the knowing.
It depends on the individual. It depends on how the individual interprets the word nischay, because these words are very subjective. You see, you can't really quantify faith. You can say for yourself, I had a perception and I got faith in it. So for me, that's nischay. And then belief in comparison with that is you believe something somebody told you enough that you accept it and you believe it. It's which they call suspension of disbelief. You know this expression? Suspension of disbelief is when logically you don't believe it, but because of one reason or another, you decide to believe it even though it's unbelievable. It means you override your natural response to it, which is, this is unbelievable, therefore I don't believe it. So if something's unbelievable and you believe it, that means you suspended your disbelief. So some kind of belief is like that. Like religious belief, when people hear about something as a child, because when and in religions, they usually say that give me a child under the age of 7 and I have him for life, because he will consider that you are telling him the truth and that he's a little one and you're a big one and you know what you're talking about, and he has not developed the critical faculties in the intellect to challenge you, you see. And then by that time, he's kind of got his blind faith, he's stuck with it until maybe teenage, when they start building the critical faculties, and you start saying, well, you know, this doesn't seem right to me. And then you'll have a few arguments with the religious authorities, and they either get you or they lose you, you know. And so why did we come into Gyan? Why did we accept the things that we accepted? And you'll see that in how people talk about it. So you get a lot of BKs who use jargon, and they'll use the word drama for anything and everything. And they'll say, Baba's made this birthday cake. Excuse me. Why does he need to do that? You know, like God does everything. And then they think that makes them good Raj yogis, you see. But this is very, very subtle stuff. And so a few people can grasp it, but it's a very small percentage. A lot of people take it like they take the regular blind faith religious belief. And so, you know, as long as everything is nicey going along okay, and it doesn't really matter whether you make sense of it or not, you are happy about it. But when you get a very big challenge, like a big bang, that's when you can experience disillusionment. And disillusionment is a very, very important part of the experience of Gyan. Disillusionment means that you have some illusions. You've been going along on the basis of some illusions, and they're used by date as past, and you need to be disillusioned. in that particular area. So gradually you get a number of these bangs so that you have no illusions about anything eventually. And you also grasp it and you got it clear, you know.